Welcome back, and what a delight to have back with us, and very timely to say the least, our good friend Jodelle Onstadt. She's the author and the editor of this book, which is, I think, is one of the great resources of our day. I find myself often in this book doing some research, and man, has she done her homework. Yahweh Exists, Part 1. And let me encourage you, put out by Emmanuel Publishers, and check it out at Amazon and get a copy of it, okay? And by the way, her website is yahwehexist.com. So, Jodelle, good to see you. How you doing, my friend?
I am wonderful. Great to be with you this morning. And you are right, a very timely discussion.
Wow. To talk to an Arab that has seen the light, so to speak, by actually the experience that he had was at the Wailing Wall, and he said, something's wrong here. These people do want peace. They do have love, and to have a Muslim see that and convert from that is quite a deal. But the war exists, the conflict exists. Let's start with Iraq and Syria and what's happening over there, and how can we get a biblical perspective there?
Well, you know, it's funny when we look at, or rather ironic. It is ironic when we look at the modern conflicts and we find that modern history, that the events that are unveiling before our eyes were spoken of 3,000 years ago. So you find that in particular, the conflict in both Iraq and Syria are mentioned in Isaiah 49. And it's uncanny. It talks about men dying in the streets. It talks about the conflict, and it even mentions particular cities such as Hamath and Damascus. There was a massacre that occurred in Hamas in 1982, and this war between the insurgents and those that want to dominate continues, and it's really this cry of freedom. You know, America had this cry back in the early 1800s, late 1700s. But we find that you have both the extremists and then you have those that want democracy. And, you know, the power keeps shifting back and forth, intervened oftentimes by allied forces on the American side and the UN side.
It's an amazing. This has been going on for centuries, as you said, and now it's boiling over into other countries and at a level and at a rate we've never seen before. But this actual theological bent of the Islamic faith, their way or no other way, that's been from the existence, right?
It really has. When you go to a lot of the founding documents, when you go to the Quran, and then later on there were other additional writings added to the Quran, you find that the ideology is one of jihad. And from a biblical perspective, when you look at the prophecies of Edom, how he would live by the sword, you find that that really is the ideology that Islam is founded on. So when you look at the history and the conflicts that have occurred for 1,500 years between Sunnis and Shiite, between all the different tribes, because it's not just Sunnis and Shiites, you have other factions within the Sunnis that war against each other, rival tribesmen, and you know, and they'll take advantage of families and the innocent. So it's not a new page in history. It's rather the repeating of an ancient history that continues to this day, and it is spilling over into other nations. You know, the Western nations that tend to turn a blind eye and tend to ignore the conflict and just hope that it will go away, they are really the ones that are accepting most of the refugees kind of out of almost a compulsion for compassion. But, you know, at what point, you know, do you allow a cancer to come into your nation and to ferment, rebellion against your own government? So it's a very tedious line that the West is walking in regards to immigration and in regards to the Islamic religion as a whole.
Let me back up just a little bit, Jodelle. Was this an ideology turned religion, or has it always been religion? With
Islam in particular, I do not see where you can separate ideology, religion, and politics. When you look at the teachings of Muhammad, a lot of them did have to do with conquest. They had to do with ideas of domination, of subjugation. As was mentioned in your previous interview, the whole idea of establishing a caliphate and having this submission to Islam is the founding idea. But it's ironic when you look at the Hebrew text, when you return to the Old Testament, that those are the very prophecies of Edom and how he would live by the sword, and that conflict would really dominate his history until the latter days.
All right, because there seems to be a shift now from pro-America, pro-Israel to pro-Islam, to the point where the European countries are allowing them in as refugees at an alarming rate. And we're seeing in England and Great Britain now where they actually are allowing for the setup of Sharia law. I guess, does the Bible say anything about this migration?
It doesn't say anything about the migration in particular, but what it does say is it outlines a general paradigm. In Deuteronomy 28, verse 43, it states that if you depart from the good way that God has taught you, then the enemies that live among you will get high above you, and you will become very low. He will lend to you, and you will borrow from him. The idea of lending is one where immigrants come to your land, they live there for a few decades, and they gain power. They're very resourceful. They work very hard, and they get above you because the people in your own land have become complacent. They don't really care, and this complacency allows them to gain the upper hand and to dominate. So where your laws, your ideas of justice, and your values may have guided your nation for hundreds of years, they are being supplanted by foreigners that begin to rule over you. And this is nothing new to history. Egypt faced this throughout its history. During the Second Intermediate Period, they were invaded by Amorites who subjugated the native Egyptian population. So this is, again, just history repeating itself over and over again, until we finally learn that, hey, if we return to the good way, if we return to the values that have guided us and made us strong, then we will not be dominated. But we have to fight our own complacency and our own willingness to accept this. When you look at California, and it isn't just Islam, you have immigrants from Mexico who are demanding that California be repatriated to the Mexicans, and that they're going to reconquer it. So you have, this on one side, you have Islam on the other, chanting death to America in many places across the globe. And so you find that when we depart from a righteous way, when our people on when our armies on foreign land do not uphold our core values that made us strong, we become very weak, and then we're able to be dominated by all these other factions that have ulterior motives and live by different standards and a different code.
Only in this whole battle of the Islamic faith trying to dominate the world, do they pre-announce what they're going to do? And in this communication age, we know exactly what they're going to do. Then they do it, and then we seem to be shocked by it. Then we don't want to offend them because they have the right of free speech to do it. It sounds like to me we've left our brain outside the door. I want you to comment on that when we come back. And again, Jodelle Onstott with us. She's the editor of this incredible resource called Yahweh Exists. Wow. I can't say enough about this book. I find myself often in there getting clarity. Go to YahwehExists.com. That's the website, YahwehExists.com. We'll be right back.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at thedove.us.
Welcome back, and what a delight and an honor to have back with us our good friend Jodelle Onstott. She is the author and the editor of Yahweh Exists, one of the great resources of our day, and that's also the website, YahwehExists.com, and she's helping us get a biblical perspective on what's happening with the incredible expansion of the Islamic faith and Muslims across the world, especially the radicals. And Jodelle, you know what's so interesting to me is that we're allowing those people, our enemy, to say death to America, death to Israel, and to get away with it as a right of free speech, and yet we don't see it as a warning, while yet innocent people are being killed, especially Jews and Christians and women and children. And somehow we don't want to offend this. The question I would have, and takes you. You're a biblical scholar and a constitutional scholar. Is this what was meant by free speech?
You know, this is one of those questions that is difficult because the ideas of free speech are very broad under the U.S. Constitution. Biblically, free speech ends where I threaten you. So if I threaten you to do harm, then my right to free speech has been lost. But this distinction is not made where this idea of self-preservation is not readily acknowledged by today's generation. Historically, it has been. When we felt threatened in World War II, we went to help. We went to fight for liberty and for freedom. But modernly, the ideas of right and wrong have become so skewed because they have no foundation. We no longer look to the Constitution. We no longer have biblical values. You know, both Madison and Jefferson said that a society, that the U.S. Constitution was so broad that you had to have a moral and a very religious, biblically based society in order for the Constitution to work. So it was seen to be a complement to govern our society. So with the loss of the Bible being a source of reference, we are really a ship without a sail, just kind of floating on a sea with nowhere to go. So our policies are really just stick your finger up in the air and see which way the wind blows. We have adopted policies of complacency, policies of just trying to satisfy the demands of others without thinking of our own future or looking to the future. You know, you mentioned in your last interview, what is the recourse that we have? What is a sound policy that can change the tide and restore America to some sense, you know, where we're not just, floating in the wind? And I believe the strongest case and the strongest policy is one advocated by Natan Sharansky, and that is called reciprocity. During the Reagan years, Reagan followed the policy of reciprocity. In Scripture, it's termed eye for eye and tooth for tooth, where when you have, say, nations such as Syria, you hold them accountable to their level of human rights, how they treat their own citizens, their level of allowing the people a say in their own government. But beyond that, you also hold them accountable to how they use their capital and their foreign aid. That is something we do not do, whether we give money to Africa, Syria, it doesn't matter. We turn a blind eye to how those monies are funded, and they usually retain within the very elite ruling classes of those nations. They never help the people to whom that aid is intended. So until we adopt a policy of reciprocity, which Reagan used to help bring down the USSR, until we do that, we are going to remain ships without a sail. But the key with reciprocity, it is based on values and standards of human rights that the Islamic world may not agree with. So we have to really stand up for our own values rather than just rolling over backwards to accommodate and please everybody else. We have to stay strong for what is right.
Well, that's so well said, because we will be strong in criticizing China for its human rights violation as it relates to children and women, and yet we are totally silent on Iraq and Iran and Syria on its treatment of women. We're in the middle of a political campaign where we're saying women's right for abortion, women's right to vote, women's rights for this and that, and yet women under Islamic philosophy has zero rights. In fact, they are killed and persecuted. We're not consistent with who we are.
Very true. You know, the whole feminist movement is really one of self-destruction. You look at the founding of Planned Parenthood and the ideas of abortion, it's not for preservation of society. In the very first covenant that God gives to Abraham in Genesis 12, he promises him a multitude of seed. This promise is to ensure that Abraham's children as a nation, the children of Israel, can protect themselves. I mean, look at how the Shiites have been dominated for this by the Sunnis for centuries. I mean, when you are a smaller population, you have a more difficult time in establishing your rights and your freedoms. And this is for all societies, not just within America, not just within Islam. So when we turn our backs to that in America and we allow our people to just destroy themselves, to not reproduce, then we limit our own potential. One of the reasons why we are facing this threat of Islam is because the average Islamic family has about 9 children per family. So compared to America, who has like 1.8 or 2 children per family. So when you do the demographics and you work the statistics, you find that this is actually a military threat to America. And previously you had discussed that the Muslim extremists are only about 10%, 8 to 10% of the society. Well, given 1.8 or 1.5 billion Muslims, that's still 1.2 to 1.5 million Muslim extremists that have the potential to do a whole lot of harm. But we are silent. You know, feminism looks towards just the elite few in America as far as having the rights to self-determination, but we are utterly silent when those rights are dealt with in other nations, especially Islam or say India, where women are historically, they're battered, they are oppressed, and their voice is not heard. You know, our movements here in America, our feminist movements, become silent. So it is a double standard, and one that if we are going to achieve a universal level of human rights, that we have to fight for, no matter whether we're American, whether we are Islamist, whether we are Indian, no matter where we come from. It is something that has to be universally upheld and a right that we have to fight for and not be complacent with.
Very well said. Let me ask you this. We've got about 3 minutes, Jodelle, and that is the refugee issue. They're leaving these countries by the thousands, hundreds of thousands, and they're seeking asylum in other countries. The question then becomes, are these true refugees running for their lives when we know infiltrated in with them are those who have motives to take over? How are we to treat this? What's the biblical response to this?
The biblical response would be to establish the people back in their own homeland. And I do believe that with Islam in particular, you have to start with a strong dictator. But this dictator has to be held accountable. So you would put the people back in their land, but you would help them readjust and reestablish and transition to a more democratic government. Because remember, the whole issue in Syria began with rebels crying for democracy, wanting something that was more westernized. And then it was repressed by a lot of your Sunni movements within the nation. The Muslim Brotherhood got involved, and it really fell apart. But the biblical paradigm would be not to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of their future and their prosperity, because how can we help them if we are in a state of chaos ourselves? So we have to be strong in order to be able to help them. And that is their homeland, you know, and that is where they need to be. But again, we need to ensure that stability, and we have to have high values and standards as a society in order to do that.
Is it too late for Europe?
I hate to say no. I really don't think so, but I think it will take perhaps some horrific events for Europe to wake up and to come around to the fact that appeasement is not the method that works. It didn't work for Hitler, and it won't work now for people that want to establish a caliphate throughout Europe.
Well, Paris was a warning, and it seems like Paris may have had a change a little bit, but that was the biggest and latest warning. In fact, it seems like France is supporting Israel more than the United States is these days.
Yes, thankfully, France is kind of having an epiphany, and I hope that that will continue. I think that the United States is very pro-Israel, but our voice has been silenced through our leadership. So hopefully, after the election, with new leadership, that resolve to stand with Israel will be vocalized once again, and we can draw some hopefully reestablish some old alliances and confirm our commitment to the state of Israel.
All right, about 30 seconds. It's unfair, I realize that, but biblically, doesn't this get a little worse before it gets better?
You know, the thing with Scripture is that it is always based on personal choice. So we have the option of, yes, it getting worse before it gets better, but we also have the option of it getting better. It comes down to will we refuse evil and choose good, or are we going to remain complacent? If we remain complacent, then, the tidal wave is already there. It's cresting and it's heading towards land, but it can be stopped and it can be reversed through a return to the way of God. And when we do that, it says that a righteousness covers a multitude of sins. So when you do that, it can really reverse the tide that has already begun.
Jodelle, you're a delight. Thank you. Again, YahwehExist.com is the website, YahwehExist.com. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your efforts and research and your diligence. Look forward to many visits ahead. Have a great day. God bless you. Okay, we'll see you.